Just want to do a sound check. If you're able to hear me, just someone give me a thumbs up. There you go. Good to see. Okay. So we're working. I'm a distance away, but just making sure our Zoom is connecting. We'll wait another minute as people are joining, and we'll get started. Okay, welcome everybody. Coming to you from Lake Tahoe, California. Beautiful part of the country, beautiful part of the world. I'll be back in town tomorrow, but because we are Zoom classing, we're able to continue having classes even if I'm out of town. So that works out well. You may have seen an email that was sent out just earlier today that I will be extending our Lunch and Learn class, and we'll be going throughout the summer. So throughout the entire July and August, we'll be getting together Wednesdays at 12:30 so that we have something to look forward to getting together and continuing our study of Torah. A few quick announcements and we'll get started from where we left off last week. Monday evening at 7 o'clock, I'm going to be giving a lecture. It's going to be carried live on YouTube live. I'll be sending out the link. You'll be getting it in email form, or you can go on jewishacademy.com. If you forget the link or you don't know where it is, just always go on jewishacademy.com. The link will be there. Let your friends know. It's on the subject on the power of perspective. That's the subject of the lecture. That's this Monday night at 7 o'clock, and you're all welcome to join. Also, you're all welcome to join me on Fridays. I do my Shabbat sermons Fridays at 3 o'clock on Zoom, and you're all welcome to join. Whether you generally come to the congregation or not, it doesn't matter. The sermon is open to all. So look forward to having you join for that as well. Also, if you're not as of yet linked up together with me on Facebook, there's two different ways to do that. I encourage you to do both. First, to go on Facebook, go to chabadconejo.com and like that page. So this way you get all notices that are put on the Chabad page. And then on a personal level, if you'd like to just go to my Facebook page, Moshe Bryski, and there's this way we can be friends on Facebook as well. My daughter has 1,000 more friends than I have. Now that 1,000 more friends than me. So I got to try to catch up. So if you'd like to befriend me on Facebook, I would look forward to being your friend there, even though we're friends anyway. Let's get started. We are on the subject of the golden calf. And if we were to call the first part of this subject, I would call it Act 1, was understanding the sin itself. How was it possible for them to sin in the way they did? And we spent 2 weeks on trying to understand the sin. What were they thinking? And what we discussed was that what started out perhaps a little more innocent than the way it turns out. It starts out that they're looking for a replacement for Moses because they think that Moses died. And therefore they're looking for a replacement for Moses, but they no longer want a human replacement for Moses because they're afraid that the humans will die, and therefore they wanted something that would be more perfect, that would last forever, something that they could make, and that God would instill within this entity the power to lead, which means God will dictate whatever it is that they make. And it may start out that way, but as we clearly see from the text of the story of the golden calf, it doesn't remain that way. Elements within the camp, and we identified them as the Eruv Rav, the multitudes from other nations that joined the Jewish people because they witnessed all the miracles. It was they that were so used to outright idol worship that begin to turn this golden calf sin into outright idol worship. This is the God that took us out of Egypt. This is our new God, not just our Moses. but this is the God. Last week, we explained the role of Aaron. How are we to understand Aaron, the brother of Moses, who seems to be involved in the creating of the golden calf? He is the one that asks for them to bring gold. He is the one that molds it. He is the one that says, tomorrow let us celebrate Chag LaHashem, a holiday unto God. And what we explained last week was that Aaron had one job, and the job that he saw that he had was to stall. Stall until Moses comes back. Aaron knows that Moses is coming back within hours. And if he can stall long enough, the problem can be averted. And so it is go and bring the gold that your wives have of jewelry, believing that that would stall for hours and hours. The molding of the gold, the melting of the gold, the molding of the gold, all of this would stall. It backfires. It doesn't stall. So what is his last-ditch effort? Okay, tomorrow. Let's celebrate tomorrow. Go home. Go to sleep. Go to your tents. Come back tomorrow with the hope that Moses returns in the morning. And that this way, once they see Moses, there's no longer a crisis. And again, it backfires. And that's the part where we're up to. The Torah tells us that they get up extremely early in the morning and they begin worshiping this golden calf. And it uses the word letzachek. It uses the words in which they found themselves engaging in all types of pleasure activities. You see, heathen offerings brought to a man-made God or a man-chosen God has the opposite effect on the one bringing or participating in the offering. Because what it does is it doesn't bring them closer to spirituality. It doesn't bring them closer to holiness. It definitely doesn't bring them closer to God. What it does is it brings out his wildest fantasies. It takes his wildest fantasies from the deepest part of within his own mind, and it creates it into a reality. Why is this so? Because when a human being creates a God, a man-made God, or chooses an object to worship as God, it is a subjective God. Subjective God means that he will paint this subjective God with his own wildest images as to what this God really wants. And those wants will be subjective. It will be his wants, his deepest desires, his wildest desires, his wildest fantasies, but he will subject it onto this God that he has made. So he'll place his fantasies and his wild imagination, and he invents these thoughts that this God needs to be pacified and can only be pacified by offering it that which I would want if I was God. So if his fantasies were for women or for sexual activities, he would have a God that desires sexual activity. And his worship of this God would only be through sexual activities, having sex in the presence of the God, believing that that is serving God because he is taking from his wildest fantasies and he's subjecting it on this idol. If he's a bloodthirsty individual, he will have a God that he believes desires blood. That's why so much of idol worship involved the spilling of blood, the murdering of human beings in the presence of their idol. In fact, the murdering of their own firstborn child in the presence of their idol. Because they subjected their own fantasies, their own wild thoughts as to this is what God must want. If it was about the indulgence in wine, the indulgence in food, many heathen services consisted of wild orgies and drunkenness. Instead of man being raised to the highest potential, man falls to a state of an animal, of debauchery, and totally cutting off the chains of morality. This is a deliberate statement being made by those involved. This is what this group that now takes control of the sin of the golden calf is saying to the masses, saying to the rest of our ancestors, saying to the Jewish nation at the time. We no longer are tied to those laws that Moses presented to us. We will present to you new rules about what this new God desires. Forget the laws you heard a few weeks ago at the 10 Commandments at the Revelation at Sinai. Forget the laws you've heard from Moses since the Exodus of Egypt. We're going to present to you a new way of worship, and it's a lot more fun. No longer are we tied to the laws of Moses, but this new God desires us to be involved, and the Torah uses the word tzachek, tzachek-like activity, sport activity, activity of the desire. Not as evil or sinful activity. No, that's not what they're saying. No, we're not going to behave sinfully. We're not going to behave in an evil way. No, we're going to do these same things that we deep down want to do, but we're going to sanctify it. We're going to say it's holy. We're going to say this is what God wants. And this is what we would call the canonization of immorality. You see, when immorality is just done by the individual is acting immoral, okay. The individual has weakness, the individual will change their ways, hopefully will be inspired to change. It becomes so much more dangerous if the act that's being done has been sanctified, at least claimed to be sanctified. No, this is holy. It becomes holy to wipe out a nation. It becomes holy to wipe out Jews. It becomes holy to discriminate. It becomes holy to act in an idol-worshiping way as they did at Mount Sinai. The canonization of immorality. I saw a question pop up on the screen, how many Jews were there at Mount Sinai? It was anywhere between 2 to 3 million Jews at Sinai in the wilderness. Immorality and evil is worse when it is sanctified as holy, as godly, as being done for the gods. And as I mentioned, how many Jews were murdered, quote unquote, in the name of God, for the sake of holiness? That's the canonization of immorality. And this is the message of the idol worshiping, the total freedom to allow of yourself to let loose in the wildest of ways. And this was a case, as I mentioned, for a very small minority. It was not all of the 2 million. It was a very, very small group that numbered perhaps in the thousands out of 2 million. So it's extremely small minority. Why then does it get so much play? Why do we talk about what such a small percentage of individuals that were there participated in? In fact, if indeed, as the commentaries say, this was the Erev Rav, this was the multitude from other nations that were involved in this. It wasn't really those who were biologically born into the family of Jacob. Why does it get so much attention? And the answer is because everyone else watched. No one put it out. No one stopped it. No one came to the defense of Aaron. In fact, Aaron's own nephew, Hur, who tried to stop it, was murdered, and no one stopped. They were confused. They were shell-shocked. Perhaps they felt leaderless. But no one acted. That is why God was so disappointed. You have to learn to speak up. You have to learn to act. You can't allow a minority to take that type of control. Not ever, but especially not so soon after Sinai. And perhaps, I say this just as a perhaps, as a thought, take it for what you like. Perhaps this was so important for all of the nation to see and to witness, because what they came face to face with was the very opposite of what was being asked of them. They saw, they lived through seeing what will happen if we don't follow the ways that God presented to us. Those of you that are educators, teachers, or remember your own days in elementary school, remember when we studied vocabulary. The teacher puts words on the board and gives us the understanding of these vocabulary words. Sometimes, most of the times, they give us the meaning of that particular word that they want us to understand, and then they'll test us on it. But sometimes the teacher finds a different way of explaining the vocabulary word, and that is by giving us what's called the antonym of the word. The antonym of the word is the opposite of the word, and sometimes, especially for a child, it is easier to understand the meaning of a word if I'm given a clear picture of what the opposite of the word means. The Jewish nation was shown the antonym of Judaism and belief in God. They saw the very opposite of what worship of God means, the opposite of bringing an offering to God. And they saw how quickly one can fall on the slippery slope of violating God's command. What started out, all we want is a symbol, all we want is a replacement for Moses. But look how quickly, literally within minutes, that turns into outright idol worship. Give those who want to destroy the Jewish faith a little opening, and they will open it up as wide as the ocean. So now they witnessed, our ancestors witnessed, that the slightest aberration from the idea of acknowledging God as the one and only God, brings about an ultimate total aberration and ultimately a total denial of Torah law. The moment you say, we can just change a little bit, you'll never be able to slow down the demand to continue the change. Aaron tried to find the path that would compromise a little bit. We'll just make a little calf, and we'll continue to focus on God. We'll just make a little variation here and there. It didn't work. It's so important, therefore, as well, that it is Aaron himself that's involved in this, that he and all of his descendants, the future Kohanim, the priests of the Jewish people for all time, and all the Kohen Gadol, the high priest that would come in future generations, and all future leaders know that the danger in them deviating from God's instructions and laws in the slightest can immediately mushroom and multiply and so quickly get out of control. He cannot make the decision that changing a little will help keep the rest. Aaron thought that way. It backfired. You can either acknowledge and respect the Torah or deny it, but you can't alter it. Now let's get to Act 2, the defense of Moses. Moses' defense, the defense of the Jewish people. God tells Moses, as Moses is still in heaven, the 40th day, and he says, go down, class is over, workshop is over, see what your people have done. In your absence, they have made this golden calf and they worship it, saying, this is the God who took you out of Egypt. And then God says these words, V'ata and now, hanichali, leave me alone, God says to Moses. Step back, hanichali, get back. And I will wipe out this nation. And I will start a new nation from you. This experiment is over. This chosen people experiment has come to an end. Look how so soon after Sinai, how so soon after Revelation, look at what they're doing. Picture that there's a video screen up above in heaven, a big one of those real big screens. And God's got Wi-Fi, he's got it all, and he puts on the screen for Moses to see up in heaven what's happening below. And he tells Moses, you look, and therefore over. Stand back, he says to Moses. I will wipe them out. We're going to start all over, take two. Just, this is over. You hear those words from God. You're Moses. Stand back, and I will wipe them out. But what if I don't stand back? What if I don't leave you alone as you're asking? Meaning if I don't stand back, if I pray for them, if I beg for them, if I fight for them, if I plead for them, maybe I have a chance to stop the destruction. See, Moses could have taken the phrase of God at face value. God commanded him with a direct commandment. The direct commandment was, leave me, stand back, stand down. The perfect servant follows instructions, whatever the consequence may be. Moses, however, was first and foremost the perfect leader, and then and only then the perfect servant. So as the perfect leader, his job, first and foremost, is to defend the people. Moses is going to be the attorney for the Jewish people, and he's going before the supreme of all supreme courts. In the case of survival of our people, will the chosen people experiment continue? That's Moses' case. But he gets the opening that there can even be a case from God using the words stand back, stand down, which means if I don't, then you won't destroy them. See, God gave him two routes. One was to save the people, one was to build up himself. Remember, part of it, he says, and I will create a new nation from you. Moses now has a chance to be the father of a new nation, right? He could have easily chosen the latter and justified it by saying he was so commanded. But he chose the former. He was commanded by God to be their leader, and therefore this is his job, to defend the people come what may. So Moses now has to defend the indefensible. Those of you that are on now watching live or watching it later, if you are the defense attorney, if you are a defense attorney, and you're handed a case that you look at and you say, oh my gosh, it's indefensible. How do I stand up before a judge and defend my client? So you can either look at the case and say, there's nothing here for me to do, or you can say, this is why I went to school. This is why I spent all those years studying law, so that when I'm given a case that looks indefensible, I find the defense. That's Moses. And although to us now, we know the end of the story, so it seems natural that Moses chose this route, that Moses would see within the words of God this opening for intervention. It wasn't that simple for Moses to come to this conclusion. Keep in mind, Moshe is filled with awe of God. Moshe is filled with fear of God. Moshe has tremendous respect for God's judgment. He knows God to be infinite, and he knows that God is perfect. Keep this all in mind. And here, this perfect, infinite God makes a very clear statement. Leave me alone. Coming immediately after the prior verse, Lech Red, go, leave me alone. Go down. And then the judge, God, gives his verdict. He passes a verdict and says, I shall destroy them. So the judge, the infinite judge, the one who knows all, has passed judgment that this people needs to be wiped out and a new nation must begin. Why would Moses think he had any chance to argue? Why would Moses think that he had a right to argue? Why would Moses think that it would be the right thing to argue? Again, Moses is a human being, so you have to see this from the frustration that he must be feeling. He knows more than anyone else what God did for these people. He knows more than anything else, anyone else, the miracles that God performed for this people. He knows about every single plague that happened in Egypt because he was involved in every one. He knows about the splitting of the sea. He knows about the water of the rock and the manna from heaven. He was involved in every part of the story. He knows about the revelation at Sinai because he was their front row seat. How unappreciative is this nation as he's watching it on the big screen. And they complain, why did you ever take us out of Egypt? And they complain about food, and they complain about water, and now this. If you're a human being, a human leader, the frustration at some point gets to you and you throw in the towel. You throw in the towel because God himself just passed verdict that the chosen people experiment is over. You saw the failure of it. You saw it's not working. You're Moses. You took a look at this and you said, this is crazy. They're bowing to a golden calf saying, this is the God who took you out of Egypt, right after they heard directly from God that you cannot make any graven images. You throw in the towel. If the revelation can't get them in shape, nothing will. It is only Moses' intense love, his intense love for the Jewish people that overrides all. He risks violating a direct command of God to try and defend and protect his nation. That's Moses. And it's not just Moses now. It's going to be Moses throughout the 40 years. He understands that first and foremost, he must lead these people, and to lead these people at times, you need to defend the indefensible. Defending the indefensible does not mean that you make it right. It means that you work to bring about repentance and change. And in Moses' plea to God, The plea to God that Moses issues that's recorded in the Torah is actually given the name of Vayichal, a supplication. And besides it for being read in the portion of Kisisa in the Torah, it's also read in every synagogue on every fast day. For a fast day is about asking for forgiveness. So we remind ourselves of the first time that our survival was in jeopardy and that Moses stood up and prayed to God for forgiveness successfully. So we reread this every single fast day for thousands of years to remind ourselves of the great defense of Moses, of the Jewish people. And just like he begged for forgiveness, we beg for forgiveness. Moses, in his defense, if you want to analyze it, and we do, he will use a number of approaches, all combined into one plea. But just like any good attorney will sit down and they'll map out their strategy, Moses has a strategy. And keep in mind that his prayer becomes the standard outline for prayers for forgiveness in the future. So let's briefly outline and then look closer. Let's outline his strategy. Number one, he's going to focus on the words that God used when God said, your people have created this idol and are worshiping it. And God used the word your people as if they're Moses' people. He's going to play on that. And that's going to be his first line of defense. They're not my people. They're your people. And they're an infant, and they're a child, and they need love, and they need mercy. We'll dissect that soon. He's then going to play on what will the nations of the world say when they hear that God wiped out the nation that he took out of Egypt. Number three, what will Egypt say? What will the people of Egypt say when they hear what took place? And finally, number four, if all else fails, we always fall back on Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do it for them. So let's take a look. Let's analyze now in depth Moses' plea to God and his begging for forgiveness. He begins with a very interesting line. This is his opening line. He says, Lama Hashem yechere apcha. Lama Hashem yechere apcha. Why, God, are you angry? Can you imagine that's your opening line? Jewish people just heard from God, direct revelation, Mount Sinai. They've made now a golden calf. They're worshiping a golden calf, or they allowed people to worship a golden calf. And God's upset, and his first line is, what are you getting so angry about? What do you mean? What do you mean, why am I getting angry? Don't you see the screen? It's just an amazing opening line when you think about it. Why should your anger flare up? Or people that were treated to more miracles than any human being ever witnessed and paid God back by saying, this is the God who took you out of Egypt. And they're bringing offerings to this golden calf. I would say that God has some justification in being angry. But when you view it within the next few words of Moses, you begin to understand his initial approach and how brilliant it was. He says, why are you getting so angry at this nation that you took out of Egypt? Asher hotzeisa me'eretz Mitzrayim, who you took out of Egypt. They have been slaves for 210 years. Who are you angry at? A people that never tasted freedom? A people that grew up with a whip on their back? A people that had quotas of how many bricks they needed to lay every single hour? You angry at them? A people that were ruled by Pharaoh and taskmasters for 210 years in a land of Egypt, a land of idolatry. That's where you kept your people, in a land of idolatry, to see and to learn from that nation for 210 years. You kept them there, being beaten, being whipped. And the means of worship in Egypt was not God, it was idol worshiping. That was their upbringing. That was their society. So it's going to take some patience. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some maturing. And yes, God, you call them stiff-necked people. Certainly you, Almighty God, knew when you first met me at the burning bush that they were stiff-necked people. And yet you said that the time has come to pluck them out of their slavery and to make them your people. That's what you said to me when we first had our contract talks at the burning bush. And you performed all these miracles. You didn't perform them for a perfect people. You knew they were a flawed people. Did you expect immediate obedience from a nation that was enslaved for 210 years? If immediate obedience was what you were looking for, you never would have picked them. They would not have been your chosen people. They would still be enslaved in Egypt. You would have gone out, you would have found some soft, weak, simple people. You would have wowed them with some miracles and you would have gotten obedience. You know that, I know that. You could have picked so many other small little nations and molded them just the way you wanted. You've done a miracle here, give them some water over there, some food from heaven there. My gosh, you would have had obedience. But that's not who you wanted. No, you wanted this nation. Why? I know why, says Moses to God. Because they are a stubborn people. Yeah, that's the reason you wanted them. The same reason you say now they're a stubborn people because look at what they've done. That's what you liked about them. Because the mission that you have, the eternal mission that you have, this chosen people mission that you have demands a stubborn people. The mission statement calls for a stubborn people. So yeah, we have a crisis now. We'll overcome it. We'll get back on track. We'll need to get their free choice to make the right decisions. But divine justice is going to have to calm down a little bit. And don't carry out no plan of canceling the chosen people just yet. It's too soon. Give me a chance. You asked me at the burning bush to lead, let me lead. You asked me to teach, let me teach. You asked me to inspire, let me inspire. Let me do my job. Give me a chance. The fact that it happened so soon, what do you expect? They just came out of 210 years of slavery. Opening lines of Moses. Brilliant, just brilliant. He's almost putting God on the defense here. Second line of defense. Lama Yomu Mitzrayim. Why should you give Egypt something to say? Why should you give the nations of the world something to say? This will be what we call a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. That will come forth from this. That will have far worse consequences than the sin itself. Right now, Egypt and all the nations in the region have seen, they have heard about all the wonders and miracles that you have performed for the Jewish people in Egypt. And now when they hear that you wiped them out in the wilderness, what will they say? Either that God met up with an enemy that was too strong for him, or Beroah, all along he had evil on his mind. This was all some evil plan of God. His intention was to take them out of Egypt so that he could wipe them out in the wilderness. Why should Pharaoh have all the fun of torturing human beings? I want in on it. And being that I am stronger than Pharaoh, let me take the Jewish people out of Egypt so that I can join the fun of destroying them and wiping them out. That's what they're going to say because that's the culture from where they come. How many times did you, God, stress that the Exodus was not just about educating the Jewish people? It was not just about taking this nation out of slavery to bring them to the mountain, but that it was also about proving to Egypt and the like, Ani Hashem Bekerev Haaretz, that there is a God in the world, that you are God, the one and only God, that you rule this world, and that you rule it with justice and with love and with mercy. That's what this was all about. All of that will be wasted. This will teach Egypt and the other countries that indeed their way and their method are correct. People are made to be used and killed at whim. Everything we preached against in your name, instead of worshiping a loving God, they will go back to worshiping power and tyranny. You will appear just like Pharaoh to them, only a more successful one. Remember, the whole pitch made to Pharaoh was to let my people go so that they may serve me. Is this the results of serving you? Is this what you want the world to see? This is what you get for going to the mountain to serve God, that ultimately he wipes you out? That's what Egypt is going to say. That's what the headlines are going to be on every news site, on every social media. That's what's going to say everywhere in the world, that God took them out so that he can wipe them out. Why should Pharaoh have all the fun? This would only strengthen those who govern by force and brutality. No lesson will have been learned from the Exodus. It will all be for waste. That's part 2 of the defense of Moses, which brings him to Zechirat HaAvos, the memory of the patriarchs. He right away comes back to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And the power of bringing up Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is so strong that we see that as soon as Moses will say that, it immediately God will back down from his threat. It immediately brings about divine approval. And we find similar references to this idea of bringing up the patriarchs used by Solomon, used by Elijah, used by Daniel. This is why we, at every one of the times that we recite the Amidah, what do we do when we open the Amidah? Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. We immediately open by mentioning Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's our refuge. We open our morning prayers with, what are we? What is our lives? But we're not worthy of asking God for all the blessings that we ask. But nevertheless, we ask. Why? Because we are the descendants of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob. Because you took an oath to them that you would take care of their offspring. And so we beseech you, God Almighty, as a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The patriarchs earned this. Abraham was tested by God 10 times and passed all 10 tests of faith. He was not rewarded for this in his lifetime. So even if his descendants violate all 10 commandments, you owe it to Abraham to forgive his descendants on his account. You owe him some credit. And the credit of the balance that he had earns interest. And if you won't spare them on account of the patriarchs, then what good is your assurance that you'll start a new nation from me? Listen to the strength of Moses' argument. If my pleading with you in the name of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob doesn't succeed, what did you say? I should stand back. You're going to wipe out the new people, the Jewish nation. You're going to start a new chosen people from me. What good is that? Sooner or later, they're going to sin, and you're going to destroy them too, just like you're doing to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's descendants. And you promised them that they were going to live on eternally. So if you won't forgive this nation that has 3 great patriarchs, what chance is there that you're ever going to forgive a nation that only has 1, myself? And then he concludes this with Moses reminding God of the promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see, it's one thing where he just says, spare them in merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But he goes beyond that. He says, God, you made a promise. You made a promise to them that their descendants will multiply like the stars in heaven, a promise that they will inherit the world. So how can you wipe them out? You made a promise. You're God. You got to keep your word. Now, the initial thought is that Moses is saying to this challenge of God wanting to wipe them out, meaning that this will be a violation of the promise. So first Moshe brings about the remembrance, and then he finishes with the strong stuff saying, hey, you promised, you got to keep your word. The problem with that interpretation is that even if God was to follow through on what he said, of wiping the people out and starting a new nation from Moses, God didn't violate any promise if Moses survives. If Moses lives on and a new nation comes forth from Moses, Moses comes from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there's no violation. How does Moses throw at God, you would be violating a promise? He's not violating a promise. He's not ending the chosen people. He's just restarting it from one of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, namely Moses. And God said it will multiply this new nation. He can still multiply Moses' new nation. He can still fulfill all the promises he made to the patriarchs through this new nation that will start from Moses. Now, you could say that Moses was implying that he wouldn't go along with the plan. And thus, if I, Moses, quit the plan, and I don't allow a new nation to start from me, I don't go along with you, God, that would put God in the position that would cause him to violate his promise to the patriarchs. You follow what I'm saying? There's a promise. The promise is that God says to the patriarchs, it's an eternal nation. If it's an eternal nation, they can't ever be wiped out. We could never be wiped out because of the promise that God makes to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses is somehow using that. Now, if he's using that, but God didn't say I'm wiping them out. God says, I'm wiping out those people that are standing down there by the golden calf. All of them are guilty, the ones that are serving it, the ones that were silent. They're all going to go, but we're going to start up now from you, a new nation. Well, this new nation still comes from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so there's no violation of the promise. The only way there's a violation of the promise if Moses says, I quit. I'm not part of your team, God. I'm not going along with the chosen people idea. Now, if you wipe them out, you're violating your promise, and a God can't violate a promise. The problem with that would be, was Moses calling for the death of his own sons? Moses' children are already born. They're there. Would he tell his sons not to follow in God's footsteps? Trying to defend the Jewish people is one thing, but threatening to abandon the faith, that's not Moses. Moses loves God. He's not threatening to walk away from God. He's not threatening to abandon God. He's not threatening that he's not going to believe in God. There's not a hint of such a thing. He believes in God. He knows God. He studied with God. He loves God. And no matter what happens, he's going to be loyal. So why then does he bring up the promise? I understand he makes reference to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he mentions the promise. You promised them. What is Moses saying in the promise? What Moses was asking was, when you made the promise, what were you thinking? Follow me on this. This is critical to understand Moses' defense of the Jewish people. And it's brilliant. He's not saying, God, you're violating the promise. He's reminding God that he made the promise. How could you make such a promise, God? You had 3 giants in front of you, each one great in their own right. Abraham was followed by an Isaac, followed by a Jacob. But you knew that they weren't going to be there down the road, that they're going to have descendants. They're not going to be all these perfect giants. And yet you made the promise to them. Why? Because you knew, God, and you know, God, that there was a gene in them. There was something in them that was passed on from one to another. Something so powerful that you saw in them that made you say, these are the patriarchs that I need to build this new nation that will bring my light into this world. Whatever it was that was within them that made you feel this way, that you were confident enough to make that promise that they will be eternally carrying this mission of a chosen people, I tell you, that's right there in that nation. It's there in them. Whatever spark you saw, it's there. It's buried somewhere in them, but it's there. We need to bring it out. It's buried there because of 210 years of slavery. Give it some time to shine. This nation will produce the people that you originally intended on it to produce when you made this oath. You were thinking about something. You knew Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would die, and yet the promise was for their descendants. That means that God Almighty knew that there's something that will be passed on from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to all of their descendants that will have within them this potential for greatness, this powerful spiritual energy that will be passed on from one generation to the next. Otherwise, you never would have made such a promise. Because what if indeed the whole nation, including myself, would have sinned with the golden calf? What if this golden calf happened when I was down below and I somehow used my free choice to participate? What if there was a total sellout? How could you have made that promise about eternity if just left to free choice? Maybe we would all quit. The answer must be that you, God, knew that part of them would always be inside of us. And thus it could never be that nation that would come forth from the patriarchs that would totally sell out. That it would be impossible to happen. And not just because I'm alive, says Moses, but because they are alive, because that people below, yes, right now, caught on this video screen, it does not look good. But I promise you, I guarantee you, and you know it, God, that deep within them is that spark, and we can bring that spark back out. We can fix this. So give me some time. Give me the time I need to bring out this great potential and to bring it out in the open. Next week, we do Act 3 of the story of the golden calf, and I'll just give you the teaser. Make sure you come back, because the next words in describing the story of the golden calf are such puzzling words that to some are the most difficult philosophical questions of the Bible. Because the words that the Torah will say is Vayinochem Hashem. Vayinochem Hashem means he changed his mind. He said, okay, I won't wipe them out. The philosophical question is, how could it be possible that an infinite God can change his mind? Did God intend on wiping out the people? Did God know that he would ultimately not wipe out the people? Is it possible that a finite human being named Moses was able to convince an infinite God to change his mind? Does that not weaken our faith in an infinite God if a finite human being can change an infinite God's mind? Or did God put those words into Moses' mouth? Did Moses have free choice in what he was saying? So many questions to ask. So I'll see you next Wednesday at 12:30, and we'll try delving in and answering some of those questions. Everyone have a wonderful week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. All the best.